Hi everybody, welcome to the TST meeting. Today we're going to discuss how to better manage our contributing projects and some module ownership topics. But before we do that, give the floor to David for a shout out.
Yeah, I'd just like to give a shout out to a few different ambassadors who have stepped up for an opportunity. An Intel community manager reached out to me and said that they wanted to invite us to talk about ONOS Record and an upcoming developer event they're doing. And we put it out on the ambassador list, and several people stepped up, and they're putting it together, and it's going to include a 2.5-hour-long ONOS training session. So it was really exciting to see that come together, and really appreciate the ambassadors for taking that opportunity. So just thanks.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. If nobody has anything else?
Oh, so there's another acknowledgement. This actually happened a few weeks ago, but we have 2 new module owners. Well, we have 1 new module owner and 1 module owner with expanded capabilities. So Aaron's the new module owner, and Gian also has added list protocol and providers areas.
And we'll be announcing 2 new other module owners after the support branches have been
So we know some module ownership.
That's one of them.
Okay. So I think it's
these were actually from October. We just never acknowledged them.
I think it was happening in September, right? The voting was happening in September 12th. So
we had a discussion about so that's a separate subject. We'll be announcing those shortly.
Okay.
So the sort of the primary topic for this meeting is how we can better manage the contributing projects, because today and we go through a process of reviewing proposals for contributing projects, and but we don't necessarily one step that we're currently lacking is provisioning for how the code that's incoming for this project is going to get how it's going to get reviewed, who's going to be doing it. Right now, we assume that the work is that we just going to dip into the baseline, reviewing capacity of the TST and other existing module owners. But we're finding that this is becoming to overwhelm us, and I think what we need to do is we need to better plan for this in a proactive way, where we have some people on a hook or sort of allocated some pre-existing bandwidth for reviewing the code. So that's one particular thing that we need to address. And clearly, that should be integrated with the overall growth of the module ownership. But one thing that we want to avoid, at least in my view, is to just simply in a reactive way just to grant module ownership rights without necessarily the proper vetting. And so that's one of the issues. And I think independent but still a little bit related is an issue of how to manage the code base for the project. We've tried a couple of different approaches. The de facto place for putting contributions is usually in the applications portion of the source tree of the ONOS main repository. And for like ONOS Nemo project, we've also created a separate repository because we recognized early on during the contribution cycle that the code is going to be rather voluminous, and I'm not sure actually what the future of the project is. I'm not certain what the future of the project is. So rather than a priori bloating the code base and a Git repository with code before it reaches its maturity, we decided to do it in a separate repository. So there is certainly pros and cons to keeping things in the same repository versus multiple repositories. And there are multiple solutions that are pre-existing that deal with this. One of them is the Git submodules, another one is then the repo, which I think Ali and the code project uses. But without necessarily trying to suggest what our solution would be, some of the issues that we're having is if the project goes in if we opt for the project to go into the main repository, which is sort of the default approach as I stated, it still costs us something. It costs us the scrutiny of the peer reviews. It costs us in terms of the build times, and so we have to be cautious. And also, it tends to pollute the namespace because if the projects get loaded under the same IDE, for example, projects that may choose to name some items, let's say a device, which we've actually had. We've actually applications that call things device and link, which were terms which were directly conflicting. We find the leaf name conflicting with our core models that could lead to confusion, and we want to avoid that. So we have to be, so basically the code definitely needs to go through a greater degree of scrutiny if it goes anywhere on a repository, and if it goes potentially as a peripheral tree. And so, and plus additionally, we don't have any good way to park the project. For example, if you have somebody who wants to, let's say, implement some sort of a feature on a project, and then their company decides to change direction and they suddenly disengage from the project, and they no longer can maintain the functionality, and we don't have the bandwidth necessary to do it ourselves. We have the only choice that we have today with the code being in the ONOS repository is to remove the code from, not remove the code, but so it's still in the Git repo, but it's at least removed from the current view from the master.
Hey, Thomas?
Yes.
So I couldn't really hear anything you were saying for the last couple of minutes. Can you double check that you're not using your laptop microphone by mistake?
I'm not.
We're using Luca's telephone.
We're using Luca's telephone.
Oh, we can't really hear anything, unfortunately. So can you use a better quality microphone? I mean, you either use the whatever they are, the Polycom mics, or use the high quality.
In front of one of those.
Yeah, we currently have two auxiliary Polycom mics and the normal Polycom main phone, all with green lights on. So,
you just got a lot louder, Brian, but everyone was really faint. We couldn't really hear Thomas, unfortunately.
Bob, can you hear me?
Barely.
Okay, I think the microphone works.
It sounds to me like you're going through a crappy phone mic, or except for Brian, who sounds really loud. It sounds like you're either going through a crappy phone mic or a crappy laptop mic. It doesn't sound so good.
Well, I'll move myself closer. Hopefully this is better. But I'm a little bit reluctant, I guess, to repeat the whole spiel. I certainly can give it in a nutshell.
Sorry, Simon and I were mentioning this repeatedly in the chat channel, but nobody was paying attention apparently.
Okay. So in a nutshell, there's benefits to hosting code directly into ONOS repo. There is also caveats. Some of the caveats are the fact that we don't have a good way to park the project should it decide to go dormant, other than removing the sort of the directory from the current view, and which makes it a little bit harder to resurrect the project. While also it at least perceptually appears to be harsh action. So this is where potentially having code in a separate repository could be better. But there's also issues with having code in a separate repository, for which there are other solutions which are also without their own, not without their own problems, like the repo or the submodule, Git submodule approach. So the point I was trying to make is that we ought to allocate module ownership or at least reviewer bandwidth as part of project creation. And where, and we also ought to revisit how we deal with project source code, at least whether or not it gets hosted under the main repo, and if it does get hosted under a separate repo, how to overcome some of the issues that are associated with that. Brian, do you have another way?
So I guess the first item on the agenda was to revisit the requirements for project acceptance. And I was just looking through the project lifecycle document that we have. And as part of the creation review, one of the bullet items is that initial committers and reviewers named, and that contributors have been identified. So historically, we haven't had problems with the contributors being identified. Something missing from the project proposals that I happen to be perusing is the committers or reviewers that are named for a particular project. And so perhaps we just could use more clarity in that definition. We could clarify it here and then modify the documentation accordingly. But we've definitely received kind of a backlog of work due to an overload from projects that have not had adequate review bandwidth. I mean, on that front, I think the biggest question is some communities choose to grandfather in committers when projects are created. That has some niceties in that there's people that are interested in reviewing the code and know it should be built. But the drawbacks there are they may be unknown quantities to this particular community. What
do you mean by grandfather?
Well, so grandfather means like
people who contribute to written the code, or
right?
The people who written the code to begin with, or the reviewers? I'm not sure.
All I was saying is that some other communities have taken the approach of granting review and commit access to a set of people when a project is created. I wasn't going to advocate for that position. I was just stating it as a position, as a way that somebody could interpret our policy.
I see.
And I don't know that that's a good idea, but it does potentially mean that the initial set of committers is smaller. Sorry, I don't really want to talk anymore. I'd rather kind of open it up to other people.
I think I want to add something. So I want to talk about the second one first.
So can anyone hear Patrick on the phone?
So the second one first. So I think the first.
Let's wait for acknowledge. Bob, can you hear okay?
Can we open the chat?
Hi, Bob. Can you hear me? This is Patrick.
Yes. Keep that volume, please.
Hi, Bob. I think it's also directional because when you turn to talk to the screen.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that I want to talk to the second one first. It's lifecycle management. So that is a good process. We started this one a couple months ago. But basically, as the project leaders in the past several months, my feeling is that what I observed that we need to do several enhancements in order to make this process successful. So the number one is in the beginning when the people submit the proposal, our TST meetings, feedback and approval, that process needs to add more things. Number one is I think it's ask them to provide more information, especially their approach and their designs that potentially could affect the other modules. All this information needs to be provided. Okay, so from the TST side is basically once you prove that, you basically take the responsibility to help them to make this project successful. That is the two-way I believe will make this life cycle works. Okay, it's from this management cycle, life cycle management perspective. The module owner is basically one of the things we need to enhance this. So I understand the people's concerns in the beginnings. If you just let the people freestyle commit the code, eventually they will hurt the qualities and could have an impact on the architectures. I fully understand about this. However, how to solve these issues that make the balance between the TEST make guaranteed the architecture move forward in the right way, and meantime you can give the flexibility to the project team, make them their project being committed and successful. So I think that is what I'm thinking. Do more things in the process level is important. Number one, like I proposed, do the ask about more information, especially the architecture interface and the service you provide to the core impact, all those things in front. Once you prove that, you need to set the several checkpoints to make sure all the things meet your requirement. Seems like to me, there's a checkpoint is not being handled properly, especially for the beginning. We will just listen from the project, give the information they provide, and then say, hey, okay, start working on, and they are start working on in the meantime. Once we find something's changed that could have an impact on the architecture, then we'll say, oh no, hold on, and say, hey, you guys need doing this. I think that have the big impact on the project teams, because all the things is become uncertainty. That is something that all the people don't want to see that. So from my personal point of view, I'm thinking I want to understand all the issues, concerns, feedback from all the communities, and especially the TEST teams in advance, not in the middle or the end. So that is something in the process level we need to avoid. So I'm thinking all these ones. The second one is more important than the first one. The first one is just to offload the TEST members and all the other peoples, make them focus on more important things. Take a look at the modules. The service logic is the only guys in this project is get familiar with this service logic, right? So if their module and the functionalities doesn't impact on others, so we should give the green light. Regarding the code qualities, I think the code quality needs to be guaranteed. So the qualities like the Huawei, so we not only provide the code, just checking the code. Internally, we maintain the QA teams to run the separate QA test, like the YMS and the ACTN. So in these models, we already guaranteed that not the guarantee make the qualities is better. Okay. So from the community point of view, I think we should not care too much about the code quality, about those applications and particular features. My point is this is the communities. We should let the market and the people to select. If your quality is very bad, eventually your features checking, no one use that. So think about this one. So who want to contribute some things eventually don't be referenced or used. So I think that all these communities want to contribute and make their visibilities higher and get the people use their code. So to me, it's not my top concern about the code quality. And the module owner, I agree with the Brian's commented and see we can take the reference from other communities, select one of the people.
To be clear, that was just an example of how this could be interpreted.
Okay. Okay,
not actually my proposal.
Okay. Okay, I think that you mentioned that. I understand. We definitely need the module owner named when they propose these ones and guarantee make their project successful. I think the key point is this. Once they propose something to us, seriously, we should have a strict checkpoint. Let them meet the criteria. Meantime, once we prove that, we should take the responsibility to help them success. That is the key.
Yeah, but I mean, so that puts a lot of burden on the CST and the university to check if they meet that criteria.
Yeah.
Well, but also it raises we wanted to make sure that the initial barrier to entry is reasonably, you know, the on-ramp is accessible.
Yeah.
Right. The whole point of maybe having a loosely defined project and that you use as an experimentation, there's nothing wrong with it. We just have to simply recognize the fact that some of these projects have cost us unexpectedly. We didn't foresee the amount of code and the amount of burden that it was going to cost not only us, but I mean it's equally frustrating for the contributors when the code sits, you know, unreviewed because we don't have somebody designated to do this. We have a lot of code reviewers, but nobody necessarily that's designated to do this, and I can't always be the one driving it.
And I agree. I mean, if there's something that, I mean, in general, we should be lowering barriers to entry, and if there's something that we can do that lowers your cost and the cost of people here, maybe we can be more liberal handing out module ownership.
Exactly, and also the fact, and also this is where the two topics are related. When things are not in the same repo, things being in a separate repo definitely makes them a little bit more removed, for sure. But we can still clearly want to long-term maintain the same level of quality. But initially, they don't, because they're a little bit more removed, they don't necessarily, missteps don't necessarily have as much of an impact as they would if they were missteps that happen inside the main repo, which is why it would be one of the reasons we could be more liberal in granting module ownership.
You're giving a new module owner space to have a learning curve, it sounds like.
Correct.
Almost.
Correct. But I still don't want to do it just because in a reactive manner. I still want to do it in a very, very proactive manner. You know, an explicit granting ownership. It's not like crap, nobody has time to deal with it. I guess, yeah, we'll give you the right to deal with it.
Yeah.
That would be the wrong way to go about it. And that's what I'm trying to make sure we don't do. So, I mean, so if I heard you correctly, so one of your suggestions was to sort of make sure that we upfront provide the feedback, but I think as John pointed out, I have some reservations for that. First of all, that would put too much burden for us on the beginning, plus it would also put too much of it would raise the barrier to entry for the new incoming project.
Also, you made us show the full picture. Right? Sometimes these things come out as you
exactly.
work on things. If you're working an agile model, then it should be, you should have various checkpoints so you can review these things.
Regarding this agile models, I think that the agile model is not like we don't know something, we just want to try, right? So for some more matured ideas like layer 3 VPN, layer 2 VPN, all these features, basically it's been running in the legacy systems in the other open source projects for a long time. So that one is the matured ideas to handle that. So I don't think that need to give very what I mean is everything seems to be known, right? The impact and the potential, the influence or the effect on our architectures is clear. And all the people, when they port the code or doing something on the ONOS, they definitely have the background and knowledge about our architectures. So for those ones, we definitely need to check. For some things like virtualizations or for example, that is something new, we really don't know what will happen. That probably we can open the doors and let them to do some things. So I think the different case should be taken care of differently. What I was thinking is that we should basically, I think that is important is once we prove something, what that means. to all the teams and the community, that is something we need to consider. If you prove that means anything potentially where people get nervous and they will feel, oh, you prove something, you just say yes. What that means, I don't know. If they don't know, they were potentially uncertainty is out of control. So that is what my feeling is. We set up something, you meet my criteria, I set the checkpoint, and you should meet. Otherwise, you're out. Okay. So the OPNFV follow the same way to handle it. If you cannot meet each criteria and the milestones and checkpoints, your project definitely is not on this train. So you're out. So I think this is fair. All the people, they understand your rule, they can meet your rule, and we guarantee if you meet our rule, and we make you success. I think this is fair. It's my personal opinion. It's
were you trying to say something?
I find it useful if you try to clarify the specific proposals. I also have some thoughts too, but Patrick, could you clarify, or Brian, could you kind of write down and summarize what that proposal was, because I didn't fully understand it.
There's no proposal yet. I think we're still trying to clarify the problem statement. This potential enhancement is not a proposal per se, but it is comments on the initial project proposal phase.
Okay, I see.
Some specifics, for example, from me would be at least to try to get some sort of an estimate or assessment of the estimated code size that's going to be coming in. For example, when we were discussing the ONOS Yang tools, I envisioned a few thousand lines of code. It ended up being probably 5 times or 6 times that.
Yeah, I sort of have a proposal based on that, actually, and based on sort of a lot of these things.
Well, and this has to do with allocating the reviewer's bandwidth. And clearly, I mean, you're not going to know upfront exactly, but there's no one up for, but just sort of get a mouse, dog, elephant type sizes.
But if we go through stages, and I admit the process isn't really here, but if the process is there where the code starts in a incubation area, then you know how big it is, right? And then there has to be a specific, the project process we set up would have a specific gate as to when it became a part of the official repository, right? And so I don't think that projects should immediately just head straight for the main repository if they follow the project model. And there's probably more work we can do on the project model to make it clearer. And I agree with Patrick's comments. It's really kind of hard to know what can be guaranteed and what can't. But I think as far as knowing how much code and putting a burden on TST, shouldn't be any, right? Because it should come in first to some other place and start becoming ready, and then be migrated, right, to that point.
I mean, the thing is, I'm not necessarily suggesting that TST is not at all involved, right? I mean, I think there's some benefit with TST or just general community being involved in a project too. It's just that the burden shouldn't be in terms of we must review this code in order for it to make it to this release type of a thing is an issue. And so
yeah. So maybe I can clarify try to reframe the problem statement. So we currently have a process where we've either grandfathered in or approved about 15 projects. We have probably another 5 on the proposal pipeline. We want these projects to be successful. However, contributors to these projects are frustrated because there's extremely long polls on code review, and they're not getting the attention they need to get their code into the project. And on the TST and module owner side, there's not sufficient bandwidth or priority on review for these projects. And so ultimately, contributors are upset because they're not getting their stuff in or getting, their projects are not being successful. TST module owners are upset or frustrated because there's this backlog of work that they didn't necessarily account for. And so I think the long-term win is to enable people within a project to own it themselves and to figure out how we empower them to own it. And we can't expect people, when they come into a project, to have that setup. And so really, I think the issue here is how do we find someone within the community who is going to figure out how to mentor and empower people that are on the project to make it successful. And maybe that will involve some degree of relaxation for the project code base at the beginning, but I think really the gap here is how do we find someone who can transfer the domain-specific and community-specific knowledge to the contributors, and make sure that the code that's coming in meets our style criteria, the code that's coming in is ultimately going to fit into the bigger picture that has architectural, the architecture has some semblance of something that is ultimately going to be successful within this community's model.
I think what I proposed is let me see, probably I talked too much about that one. So for each life cycle, we need to set the criteria, and the TSTs should take responsibility to check or the release team, or we need to form new teams to check if the project meets those criteria.
So
currently we don't have it, right?
Okay, so just to be a little bit more concrete, if the problem statement that we're trying to solve is you have contributors that are excited about adding a feature or doing something in ONOS, but they don't yet have the ability to, they don't yet have the domain knowledge required to make it work in the context of ONOS. How do we solve that problem? Because adding process and stuff isn't necessary. Like adding checkpoints and adding process, yes, that's important to making sure a project graduates, making sure a project can be included in a release, making sure. So it's an orthogonal problem that I think we should talk about. But I think one thing that we need to solve is how do we ultimately onboard the members of these new projects.
Okay, it's like I said, is if you set the criteria over there and say, hey, you need to meet my requirements, the people will go to check the list. If you find it's okay, you cannot meet, use the process to guarantee that. So basically, like you said, is they don't understand what we proposed here, what we are running here. Okay, you set a criteria that is the one sentence and they meet the several commit or coding styles or something, and we can use the rules and say, hey, you meet this, meet this, meet this. That is use this form too. Otherwise, how can you?
I don't know what you mean by how do we onboard. So if there's a group of 30 developers in a company working on some project that we do want to find its way into ONOS, what do you mean onboarding?
So that group of 30 developers, do they have anyone in their community that has ONOS development experience?
Well, they have like 30 people already having ONOS. I mean, I think that's kind of Bill's point, is that the process is such that we expect that things will be sort of kind of incubated outside the ONOS project and only integrated in the source tree if sort of two things happen. One is that it's believed that they actually need to be and they are core ONOS features, and two is are they important features of good quality with everything else in place? Do they meet the criteria? So it seems that at that point everybody's been onboarded, and so I think that's what Bill's trying to say.
Yep. So I guess what I meant by onboarded is that I guess we have to decide whether or not we want the ONOS community brand to be an umbrella where anyone who wants to build a project can build a project up in his or her own way, and then it'll just be supported under ONOS, or whether the ONOS brand means that there's a certain amount of quality, that projects are organized in a certain way, that the hooks and build for those projects is going to be integrated in the overall release picture.
Isn't that what Patrick was saying? Give me the list of things that are required for the ONOS brand, and we'll meet those.
Actually,
is that what you were saying?
Yes.
So I guess the difference here is if we can quantify them and write them down.
Sure. We have already, I mean, there's lots of things are quantified already in our code style, yet we find ourselves repeatedly going to referring to people saying, no, this doesn't fit the code style as part of our code review. And so just because it's documented doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen. And yes, while we could definitely have projects incubate entirely on their own, and as a matter of fact, from my viewpoint, that would be preferable model. Do what you want with the platform, develop interesting use cases, and great. But the problem is if there is an expectation that that project will automatically, if it's successful, be able to be integrated into ONOS code base as is, that assumption is false. Is not necessarily true. It is potentially flawed one because people could write the code completely using different code styles, and then potentially even not just cosmetics, but even sort of the patterns. And those patterns may not necessarily just be lifted and dropped into ONOS code base without consequence. This is why I think it's beneficial for us to be involved early on, at least in some light level consulting phase, but not necessarily without the full burden of reviewing it. And I don't know where the median, I don't know where the balance lies here.
So I guess there's two approaches that potentially we're hearing. Patrick's approach seems to be quantify and describe the entire list of requirements, and then put that out as a check mark, and then either have a human or develop an automated process for validating. Yes. And if we could do that, then if we could do that, then maybe we can get rid of code reviews entirely. Maybe we just say the code review process is entirely automated, or a human just goes through and checkboxes it. My gut feeling is that it's going to be extremely difficult for us to do that. It's fairly easy to write a check style rule generation engine, to use code coverage or something to guarantee some fairly mechanical aspects of code style, but things like how the interfaces are defined, what the interdependence between interfaces is, how what patterns are used for constructing objects or whatever. Those types of things are a little bit more difficult to quantify, and even if you could do it, is it worth the time and effort to do it? And so we've, at least within the project core, we've relied on people to make those reviews and work with people to improve the code in that way. And so when I'm talking about onboarding, what I'm referring to is sort of the teaching process or learning process that happens to outsiders to the community by the insiders of the community to make sure that at least the code that's being submitted uses the style and patterns that the community has already adopted in the code base.
I think the three ways we can combine both together to move forward. So like you pointed out, the APIs, the architecture, the influence or the impact. Like I proposed in the beginning, is when they propose this project, they're supposed to provide some items and say, hey, I need to modify your core. I need to modify some things. Potentially, we can give a consulting the guidelines or some things in the beginning. We tell them, oh, okay, you need to provide the API document or something. I think that all these ones can be solved, but think about this one. Now we have 180 developers in the overall the community. Potentially will grow up to 200, 300. Okay, all these new guys jumping to contribute to something. You will say, oh, okay, you are a new developer. You need to learn. Okay, you are scare them. They will say, okay, I don't have time. So
interesting. We're talking about the gatekeepers. We're not talking about developers. We're talking about the gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers is the basic. Yeah.
So we don't have 200 of those. We have probably like maybe what,
16,
20 of those, somewhere around there.
Okay, so the
idea is to develop more active ones and broaden the base, of course. But I mean, clearly we want to be able to have developers who are brand new to be able to start to contribute. It's just we're talking about the gatekeepers and how to scale the gatekeepers with the amount of code coming in, and to get more eyeballs on it, to minimize the latencies for the code reviews, and to make the overall process more pleasant for everybody involved. Right?
Okay.
That's what we're talking about. Not everybody.
Okay. So the regarding this, basically, still can use the rules to do that. Like Thomas, you provide the tools to check the dependencies. That is a very good tools. We can use that one as one of the criteria when you commit the code. I basically asked you about this one before and say if we can integrate your tools into the code review or the merge process. Basically, we can check them in front. So that is one way. So I'm still thinking we can think about this one. That is not a big deal.
So one certainly not opposed to automating or increasing the level of sort of coverage or automated review that comes through automated tools. I would be very careful about coupling our success to that. It should be done opportunistically and as we see fit, right? We've done that for a number of tools, but there are simply things that can't be mechanically checked, as Brian pointed out. Some of them are purely more aesthetic, and until we quantify them where they can be done mechanically, which I think is going to be very, very hard, we're still going to have gatekeepers that are appropriately trained or well-versed in sort of local conventions and approaches and can provide their own opinion.
Okay, I agree with that. That's what I was thinking. The combined, we can combine the both together.
Yeah, but I wouldn't. So at least the way I heard it was saying, well, if you automate it, then we won't have a problem. The problem is.
No, I didn't see that.
Okay.
I know some corner cases definitely cannot be solved and checked by the tools. Tools, most of cases like coding styles, basically we have the tools, right? So the dependencies, Thomas, you already have that, and we can regarding the qualities. So the quality is basically the people's is the topic that many people talk about. So the quality is how can you guarantee the quality through the code reviews? Based on my experience, through the code reviews, find a bug. It's very little. You can't find the bug. It's basically it's running the script or something to testing your tool, testing that. Okay. So we need to differentiate the two things. One is to guarantee you are not buggy software. Another way is you are writing a good-looking coding styles. That is a separate thing. I don't want to mix the both together. Some people write the good styles, but take a look at what they are coding. They'll probably use the wrong logic. So I think the people should separate this one. So the high-skilled gatekeepers cannot tell them, okay, your coding style is not good, but they cannot guarantee that each service logic is correct. So I think we still need the process, like running the UT testings, the regression test, the testings to guarantee all those service logic are correct. So all these are, to me, is the separate things.
Yeah, I think unfortunately I can't edit the document. I can only view it, but it seems that a lot of things are being said that should probably be captured in the notes if you're taking them, Brian. So I think those are all good things. I mean, you just said, for example, that that ideally, code review would not be dealing with just low-level stylistic details, and as much of that should be automated as possible. And also, there should be a process in place to automatically run regression tests so that we're sure that any code that is integrated, that any new code can't be integrated into the system that breaks tests, which seems like new modules, for example. I think that's a sensible idea. I have a few things to say also, which I've been trying to say if you don't mind, which I'll try to be brief. It seems to me, sort of listening to all of you, that you're reaching sort of kind of a scale limit problem whose root cause seems to be that the core ONOS code base is very large, has lots of contributors, and sort of lots of churn. And it seems to me that we should really make use of the power of platforms, and you really wish ONOS to evolve into a platform and sort of more like an operating system. And if you look at how traditionally operating systems have scaled out, they've really tried to narrow the scope of each component and tried to separate things. You know, if you look at Linux, into the kernel, into libraries, and into applications. And then there's an overall distribution system which packages them into distributions. And so we're in an interesting position that we're the kernel developers and we also produce the distribution. Where I think ONOS might want to consider evolving, you know, probably strongly will want to consider evolving, is into a model more like that, where we separate the ONOS core work, you know, the ONOS kernel core work into its own project. We separate developer tools into its own project. We, you know, into its own source tree. We separate libraries, you know, that aren't required to build the core into their own, you know, but are useful for applications. Libraries also get their own individual projects. Applications get their own individual projects, and we change our packaging so that it actually sort of packages, you know, kernel, library, development tools, and applications into a coherent release. It really seems to me that that's sort of the root problem, is that there's sort of just too much stuff and all our eggs are in one basket. And so it seems that the logical way to evolve is to sort of federate things quite a bit more. And at that point, applications, you know, they can have any arbitrary development process they want. They just are bundled in, not at the code level, but at the release level.
I think that's part of it. Yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So if you want to think of ONOS as a platform, like, applications should ideally be built against releases. Applications and libraries should be built against releases of the kernel. Shouldn't require major kernel changes. But you know, our APIs can be in flux, and we may be at a point where we're revising a lot of the core APIs. But as the system matures and becomes more usable, I really think we should move towards this model where stuff gets kicked out of the main source tree, and we don't have, you know, applications in the main ONOS source tree. Instead, they get their own source trees and are packaged as part of a distribution. It complicates things. I think we need new processes and new sort of scripts and tools to make this happen, but that seems to be the logical way that we would want the platform to evolve, and that's historically what operating systems have done, and I think we want to get ONOS to that point.
Yep.
So I would suggest that, you know, we think long-term, or really even near-term, about looking in the source tree of ONOS, what can be broken out into a separate source tree, separate project. Is an app mature enough, and is ONOS capable enough that we can say, well, this application is going to live with released versions of ONOS. This library will live with released versions of ONOS. And if, you know, if they want to evolve separately, well, you know, the application will manage its own dependencies. Which is to say, you know, release version of the app works with release version of the ONOS. Development versions of the app, you know, will have to work with certain developer versions of ONOS, but it won't be the burden on the ONOS kernel developer to make sure that the app works. The burden should be on the app developer.
Yeah. So we just have to probably figure out how to logistically how to accomplish the transition to that mode of operation, because, you know, splitting into separate repositories is the easy part. There is what becomes harder is how to handle versioning, how to handle the build process, and other things like that, at least for the existing applications. Because I don't think we can eject them right outright and saying, okay, you're on your own now, figure it out.
So we have to run our own applications and all of that.
Yeah, I think you can sort of try them one at a time. You know, if you say, okay, maybe can we build SD and IP separately from the ONOS kernel? You know, and say, okay, once sort of move them out one at a time. It doesn't have to be done lock, stock, and barrel, but we can sort of try to, you know, build the machinery to allow that to happen. And then once you can sort of slowly but surely move all the applications out of the core ONOS repository and make core ONOS repository just the ONOS kernel. And similarly, application libraries that the kernel doesn't actually need for its core functionality, those can be moved out as well.
Yeah, we may need to start doing that. And so I think for the new projects, we probably need to start them the habit of just,
But with this, we run into the same problems we talked about before, where we have long release cycles. So there's a long time, depending on a feature in the core, it takes a long time before it gets released into a version that you can actually depend on. And yeah, also like a semantic versioning, right? So these things need to be.
Yeah. So well, semantic versioning is that definitely is something that needs to be addressed. But I think for addressing of your first point, we want to start with junk release, the point where we'll actually run an official release at the end of each sprint. Yeah. It won't be an official QA tested announced release, but it'll be something that will be on Maven Central that others can point to. And so you'll basically be, for a period of about 3 to 4 weeks, you'll be without the ability to see the latest.
Yeah, I think even that is a really good start for
addressing.
All right. Well,
so as I understand it, John, you were saying, well, you don't want to force application developers to wait for the next release to get some feature that they depend on. And I would argue that applications that are in development that depend on a new feature should basically run against master, the bleeding edge. I think that's usually how that sort of thing is done. And then at that point, the only gating thing is you just need to make sure that your feature gets into core. As soon as it gets into core, it's in master, you just run against master. So that's how you do it. And you just specify that the development version requires master or greater.
All right. Well, I think this was an interesting discussion. I think we definitely came up with some good suggestions, so not necessarily a concrete plan. Ali's here. You were missing on this.
Yeah. So for people, I was going to say for people with access, right access to the meeting notes, I would recommend you try to capture the stuff that was talked about so we don't forget it.
Yeah. Apologies. I made it read right now. Since I made a clone of the previous meeting notes, I forgot to switch the right bit on. Anyway, too bad we missed you, Ali, but we can catch up later. We probably still need to figure out an effective way of how to deal with multiple repositories, because that's something that we haven't formulated a concrete plan for. Well,
yeah, multiple repos is definitely a pain, but if you think about the fullness of time,
sure,
of lots of apps, their code's not going to be in core, right? And so we need a release sort of construction process which will compile all those things, test them, and bundle them into an overall release. Yeah. And also a dependency mechanism, so that you can say, well, I don't know, think about it, because Linux hasn't really done it right, so maybe, but I think ultimately ONOS will need a dependency mechanism as well. Say, oh, if you have this application, it requires this other library, which isn't part of core, but which is what it still needs, and make sure that works correctly. And figure out a way of, when you install the app, make sure it gets all its libraries.
Yeah, so I think that in the first, when you propose something, definitely we need to set a very basic thing, like which core the service you're going to use, right? Which APIs you're going to provide. And the third one is you want to be a core or the applications or the something else or tools. So all these basic questions need to be answered, right? So that we can provide the list and add more and more based on the potential necessary or the requirement, so that we can grow that one. Based on my vast knowledge, and I think no single way, no single proposal can solve all the issues, basically. Like, yeah, so we can graduate it to like agile. Here's the way to agile way to solve these issues.
Well, unfortunately, I think we're short on time. There's another meeting that we're already intruding on. So I think we probably need to continue this discussion at least in some form, maybe in the meeting notes here, to figure out, to come up with sort of more concrete set of steps. So we heard some ideas in here, and we can certainly figure out how to incorporate them into the existing process. But we also need to do some homework on what other concrete steps we can do to address those issues. So I'm going to stop the recording for now, but I think the conversation will continue. Thanks, everybody.